first time anyone from outside saw her, it was already too late. It was a late summer morning in 1964, in a corner of rural West Virginia, where the mountains close in like walls, and the roads end long before the map does. The fog was heavy, the kind that clings low to the ground and swallows the sound of your own footsteps. She was walking barefoot along the dirt track that ran between a tangle of pines, her dress so oversized it dragged in the mud, her eyes fixed on the ground, as if she didn't want to be seen. A neighbor, a woman named Clara Dobbs, spotted her from a distance and called out, but the girl didn't answer. Clara thought she looked young, too young to be carrying a stomach swollen like that, too young to be walking alone, in that condition, in a place where everyone knew danger didn't come from strangers. Her name was Layla Mae Conroy. She was 9 years old. The Conroys lived 2 miles farther up the ridge from Clara, in a house so far back from the road you could pass it a dozen times and never notice. It had been built in the 1890s by Layla Mae's great-grandfather, and no one outside the family had been inside it for more than 30 years. The place was surrounded by thick woods, and a fence made of mismatched planks nailed together so haphazardly it looked more like a barricade than a property line. People whispered that the Conroys didn't like visitors. They didn't come to town except for supplies, and even then, only one man, usually the father or one of the older sons, would make the trip. The rest stayed hidden. What made Layla Mae's case so disturbing wasn't just her age. It was what the sheriff would later write in his report. Father unknown. All potential male relatives present in household. All deny knowledge. All refuse cooperation. All share identical features. In other words, it could have been any of them. Her father, her uncles, her cousins, even her own brother. The Conroys had a history in those hills, one that went back to the days before the county had proper records. Their land was isolated, hemmed in by ridges and creeks that made travel slow and dangerous in bad weather. Over the decades, the family became their own world. Outsiders said they were close-knit. The truth was closer to closed loop. Marriages, if you could call them that, took place between cousins, sometimes between half-siblings. Children grew up knowing only the faces in their own house. It was a cycle no one broke, and those who tried didn't last long. When Clara saw Layla Mae that morning, she knew something was wrong. The girl's face was pale, her lips cracked. She walked like someone carrying more than she could bear, each step deliberate, as if any sudden movement might shatter her. Clara followed her at a distance, calling out again, but the girl kept moving. She turned off the track and disappeared into the trees, heading in the direction of the Conroy property. Clara stopped at the edge of the woods, watching until the fog swallowed her completely. That night, Clara told her husband what she'd seen. He told her to forget it. "Ain't our business," he said, the way people in those parts always did when trouble came from certain families. But Clara couldn't sleep. 2 days later, she walked into town and told the sheriff. Sheriff Alan Kessler was a practical man, not prone to chasing rumors, but he knew the Conroys. He'd heard whispers over the years. A boy born with 6 fingers on each hand, a girl who never learned to speak, children disappearing from school rolls without explanation. He'd never had reason to go up there before. Now he did. He took a deputy and drove as far as the road would allow. From there, they walked. The closer they got, the quieter the forest became. No bird song, no rustle of small animals, just the crunch of boots on dry leaves and the faint creak of old wood somewhere ahead. When the Conroy house came into view, Kessler felt something he later couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the neglect, the peeling paint, the sagging porch. It was the way the windows seemed too dark, as if they were watching instead of letting light in. An older man stepped out onto the porch as they approached. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a long, unkempt beard that hid most of his face. His eyes, when they met Kessler's, were a pale, watery blue, the kind that made you think of winter ice. He didn't smile. "You're trespassing," he said. Kessler explained why they were there, mentioned the girl, her age, her condition. The man didn't blink. "Ain't no girl like that here," he said flatly. The deputy shifted uneasily beside Kessler, but the sheriff pressed on, asking to come inside. The man refused. "Ain't nothing in there for you to see. It might have ended there if not for the sound," a soft, high-pitched cry from somewhere inside the house. The kind of sound that cuts through every other noise, that makes you stop and listen whether you want to or not. The man stiffened, his hand tightening on the porch railing. Kessler took a step forward. "That her?" he asked. No answer. The cry came again, longer this time, followed by a muffled voice, a woman's, speaking in a tone too low to make out. Kessler moved past the man before he could react, the deputy close behind. The front door opened into a dim, narrow hallway that smelled of damp wood and something else, something metallic and sour. The floorboards creaked under their boots. To the left, a small room with a single bed and a broken chair. To the right, a kitchen with an old wood stove and shelves lined with dusty jars. The sound came from farther back. They found her in a windowless room lit only by a kerosene lamp. She was sitting on a thin mattress, knees drawn up to her chest, the oversized dress bunched around her. Her hair was tangled, her skin pale and waxy. The swell of her stomach was unmistakable. She didn't look up when they entered. The woman beside her, older, maybe in her 40s, rose quickly, placing herself between the girl and the men. "You need to leave," she said, her voice low but steady. Kessler asked her name. She didn't give it. He asked the girl if she was Layla May. No answer. The woman's eyes flicked to the doorway, then back to Kessler. "We take care of our own," she said. The exact same phrase Kessler had heard from other isolated families over the years, the kind that always meant the opposite. They took Layla May out of the house that night. She didn't fight, but she didn't speak either. At the sheriff's office, a doctor confirmed what Clara had suspected. The girl was in her second trimester, malnourished, anemic, showing signs of long-term neglect. When asked who the father was, she said nothing. When asked if it was her brother, she stared at the floor. The silence told them more than any words could. The investigation that followed would uncover a family history darker than anyone in Rowan County had dared imagine. Decades of intermarriage, children born without ever seeing a schoolroom, deaths never reported, and at the center of it all, an unspoken rule that no blood left the family, ever. But before any of that came to light, there was just the girl, 9 years
Subscribe to
old,
my channel.
carrying a child she hadn't asked for, from a man she couldn't name because they were all the same man in one way or another. That was the beginning, and it was only the beginning. The days after Layla May was taken from the Conroy property were heavy with heat and suspicion. Word traveled fast in a place where nothing else moved quickly. By the time the sheriff's office filed the first reports, the story had already spread in whispers through the diners and feed stores of Rowan County. People lowered their voices when the name Conroy came up, glancing over their shoulders as if speaking it aloud might summon one of them from the shadows of the hills. Most claimed they weren't surprised. "That's how it is up there," they said. Everyone knew something was wrong on that ridge, but no one wanted to be the one to look too closely. Sheriff Kessler knew he couldn't go back alone. The morning after Layla May was examined, he returned with a team from Child Protective Services and 2 state investigators. They carried warrants this time, and though the papers bore the seal of the state of West Virginia, Kessler still felt the weight of what they were about to walk into. The Conroys had lived untouched for generations. They didn't just dislike interference, they resisted it. The path to the property seemed longer the second time, the air thicker, The silence deeper. The same older man waited on the porch. His eyes swept over the group, resting on each face for a moment too long, as if memorizing them. "We told you to leave us alone," he said. Kessler handed him the warrant. The man glanced at it, then let it drop to the porch boards. "Paper don't mean a thing up here." They entered anyway. The house was dim, even in midday, its windows covered with heavy curtains that hadn't been washed in years. The air was close, damp, carrying a faint odor that seemed to come from the very walls, a mix of mildew, unwashed bodies, and something metallic that clung to the back of the throat. The floorboards sagged in places, patched with mismatched planks. Furniture was sparse and old, worn smooth by generations of the same hands. But it wasn't the neglect that unsettled the investigators. It was the feeling that nothing here had changed in decades, that time itself had slowed to a crawl inside these walls. In the back rooms, they found signs of more children. Small beds with thin, threadbare quilts. A pile of worn shoes in sizes far too small for the adults who now lived here. Crude drawings tacked to the walls. Stick figures with identical faces standing in front of a house surrounded by jagged lines that could have been meant as mountains or fences. The drawings were signed with names that matched no school records in the county. In one room, a closet had been converted into a sleeping space, barely large enough for a narrow mattress. There was no window, just a small vent that had been covered from the inside with a piece of tin. In the center of the mattress was a single doll, its porcelain face cracked, one glass eye missing. Its remaining eye was a pale blue, the same cold shade as the man on the porch. The investigators asked the adults who these rooms belonged to. They got no answers. The women stayed silent. The men stood with arms crossed, eyes hard. Only one of the younger boys, maybe 14, spoke up. "Ain't nobody's rooms now," he said. "They gone." When asked where, he just shrugged. "Gone's gone." In the kitchen, one of the CPS workers noticed a trapdoor in the corner, partially hidden beneath a rolled-up rug. When they pulled it back, the man on the porch stepped forward. "Don't go down there," he said. His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was a weight to it that made the room still for a moment. Kessler told him to step aside. He didn't move. Two of the investigators flanked him and moved him back while another opened the trapdoor. The ladder led down into a narrow, low-ceilinged space that smelled of damp earth. The beam from Kessler's flashlight caught the rough walls and a packed dirt floor. Along one side were shelves lined with jars, some containing preserves long gone bad, others holding murky liquid, with shapes inside too warped to identify at first glance. In the far corner was a small wooden cradle, empty but for a folded quilt. The fabric was stained dark in places, the color too deep and uneven to be from age alone. What they found next was harder to explain. Against the back wall, a series of boards had been nailed in a crude pattern, forming something like a shrine. On it were tacked photographs, each one showing the same pale-eyed features. Some were clearly decades old, the edges curling, the images faded to sepia. Others were newer, their colors sharp, the faces unmistakable. Men, women, children, all bearing the same shape of jaw, the same set of the eyes. In the center of the shrine was a hand-painted sign, "Keep the blood pure." When they came back up, the man on the porch was gone. The others refused to say where he'd gone or when he'd be back. The team collected what they could, photographing the rooms, the trapdoor, the shrine. But without the man, without more evidence, they knew this would be a fight in court. Meanwhile, Layla may remain silent. She stayed in a foster home under medical supervision, eating little, speaking less. The doctors noted her reluctance to be touched, her tendency to flinch when a man entered the room. In her sleep, she muttered words they couldn't make out, sometimes crying without waking. They tried to get her to draw or write, but she refused. It was as if she believed saying or showing anything would bring something down upon her. It was the DNA tests that shifted the case from suspicion to horror. The sample taken from the child she carried matched not just one, but multiple male relatives in the Conroy household. The genetic similarity was so extreme that the lab called twice to confirm the chain of custody, thinking there had been contamination. There hadn't. The truth was worse. The degree of inbreeding was such that mapping a clear paternal line was impossible. Brothers could be fathers, fathers could be uncles, uncles could be both. When the report reached the state prosecutor, he went pale. "You can't put that in open court," he said. "You'll destroy the jury before you start." But Kessler knew the truth had to come out, even if it meant dragging the darkest parts of that ridge into the light. Subpoenas were issued. The Conroys ignored them. Warrants went unserved as deputies reported being shadowed in the woods, hearing voices that stopped when they turned to look. Tires were slashed. One investigator's house was broken into, though nothing was taken. It was intimidation, pure and simple. The breakthrough came from someone no one expected, a woman named Evelyn, who had left the ridge 20 years earlier. She'd married a man from Ohio, changed her name, and never looked back. When she saw the news about Layla May, she came forward. Her voice shook as she described her childhood, the same phrases repeated by every adult. "We take care of our own. Blood before all." She spoke of rotation nights, when the men would drink and the women would lock the younger children in upstairs rooms to keep them out of the way. She said she'd run away at 15 after giving birth to a child she was told had died in the night. She never saw a body, never got a grave to visit. Evelyn's testimony, combined with the DNA evidence and the photographs from the cellar, was enough to obtain removal orders for every minor in the Conroy household. But by the time officers returned with the papers, the children were gone. Beds stripped, clothes missing, shoes gone from the pile by the door. The adults said they didn't know where they were. "They're safe," was all they'd say. No one has seen those children since. Layla May gave birth in the winter, in a secure medical facility 2 counties away. The baby was stillborn. The doctors who examined the body said the malformations were consistent with extreme inbreeding over multiple generations. They took photographs for the record, sealed them in an envelope, and placed them in the case file. Kessler kept a copy in his desk for years, though he never showed them to anyone. "Not because I'm afraid," he once told a reporter, "but because once you see it, you can't not see it." The case officially closed in 1966 for lack of prosecutable evidence. The adults in the Conroy household faced no charges. Layla May was placed in long-term care and eventually relocated out of state under a new name. The ridge went quiet again. The fence around the Conroy property was rebuilt higher. The curtains stayed drawn. But people still talk, in the way they do when the truth is too ugly to face head-on. They say they've seen figures moving in the woods at dusk, pale eyes catching the last light of day. They say sometimes, if the wind is right, you can hear a child crying from somewhere deep in those hills. And if you follow the sound, you'll never come back. What happened to Layla May Conroy was not the first time blood stayed too close on that ridge, and it will not be the last. Because in places like that, where the past is never buried and the family is the only law that matters, the cycle doesn't break, it waits.